So welcome everyone to our fourth webinar. This is our first webinar of the new year. I trust that everybody's well into the swing of 2024. We've had, if you've joined us previously, we've had three webinars so far, and I personally continue to be really humbled by the continued support of these sessions. As we've previously done, this section is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with you after the session. So sessions like today, the one that we're looking at today is looking at advocacy platforms that promote better access to land and to land information. Sessions like today are intended to bring to your attention platforms that exist to serve you as built environment professionals, and it's also there to help the owners of these platforms to get an opportunity to hear your thoughts about what they present today. And if you've engaged with the platforms before, for you to provide them with feedback to help them make these platforms even better. So to help limit the disruptions today in the session, we ask that you keep your microphones muted and your cameras off, and that if you have any questions, we'll manage that in an open session towards the end, or the second part of our session today, that you post them in the chat. You are also welcome to just greet, as I see somebody's already doing in the chat, and let people know that you're here and where you're from. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Mark to introduce the topic today and to outline the agenda for the day. See you a bit later.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to have us all together again. This is, for me, a very exciting webinar. In my previous job, I was involved in looking at land issues across southern and the African continent. And so this is very close to my heart. So we're very happy to have 3 or 4 organizations with us today to present their platforms and to explain them and how they work. So as you can see, it's about how we combine access to land information and data, but also how that is meshed together with the activity related to advocacy. So I think often we think of land data just as neutral and as data, but it is being used by many organizations to change how the world works and how people access land and how people exercise their rights to land. So that's really our focus today. We've got 3 organizations: the Land Portal Foundation, a knowledge-based land, which is a South African knowledge-based platform, which we'll explain, the International Land Coalition and their related LandX platform. So let me just mention the speakers. You'll get a fuller bio in the chat as we go. But Romy Sato is from the Land Portal. She's the Knowledge Network Coordinator for that Land Portal. It's a very large ecosystem of data, knowledge, information, people. It's also been instrumental in even the setup of our Urban Knowledge Exchange. And we've been close partners sharing openly in information for many years. So that will be explained from Romy. Then Rick Desatya speaking about the knowledge-based land, which is more knowledge-based, but it's got some link to Land Portal, which will be explained. And in both of these cases, there's large international platforms and networks, and then there's local manifestations and local implementation and influence. And it's that relationship of how do you take the large platform that's a very broad international set of information and tools and data, and how do you make that real at the local level? Similarly, International Land Coalition, I know less about them, so I'm really interested to hear what's going to happen today. And we're very happy to have two colleagues from there, Eva Maria Okoth, who's going to speak on the ILC itself, and Mariela Schlinghoff, who's going to speak more focusing onto the Landex side. And then, like we've done before, we will, after they've each given their presentation, we'll go into a panel discussion where we bring out things like how does the advocacy work, how do the networks work. We'll have that discussion and then end off with some questions from the floor. If you are thinking of that as proceedings go along, you're welcome to put questions in the chat, or as we get closer to that open discussion, then you can also raise your hands and that. So I'm going to hand back to Cesar, but yeah, let's hand back to the speakers, and really very happy to have everyone here and really appreciate the time and the effort that's gone into coming to this point. Thank you, Cesar.
Yes, thank you. So Romy, I'm going to hand over to you. If you can just beam your presentation, I'll just okay whether it's in presentation mode.
Thank you, Cesar. I will share then my slides from my end. Okay. Moment, please. So I hope everyone, let me know if you can see it. Yes.
I can see it. It's just a bit cut off from my side. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who sees it.
Let me put it. Is that a bit better now?
It's still cut on the sides.
Okay, let me see if I can. Okay. Still cut. Okay, let me just try something else.
Okay.
Is that better? I don't know if it's a problem with my that I use Google Slides.
I'm not sure.
Would you?
I think
would you be able to share perhaps the slides that I shared with you?
That's fine. Renee, would you mind beaming?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, I hear you fine, Renee. Apologies for that.
No problem. I'll be sharing soon.
Sorry, Renee. Sorry, Renee. Okay, I think just be aware that there is a bio in the chat so long on Romy and just her expertise and experience. And yeah, over to you, Romy. Thanks.
Thank you, Cesar. Yeah, and I just thank you, Anthony. I see that you were mentioning that the resolution is probably too high. Yeah, this is probably an issue that I have here with my screen as well. Yeah, and I just had a change in my title just before joining this webinar today. Now I'm going to be called the Knowledge Management Lead in the Land Portal. Just because I think when I started this job 4 years ago, we were really thinking in terms of a network of researchers, of reviewers that work with us also on a voluntary basis to review a lot of the work that we are doing. But anyways, moving on. I'm going to present a little bit of the Land Portal, and thank you very much for the invite as a resource space now for open land data. Yes, so the Land Portal was established in 2009, initially as part of the International Land Coalition, in fact, who is also with us here today. And it became an independent organization, an independent nonprofit organization in 2014. And it was established to create, curate, and disseminate land governance information by fostering an inclusive and accessible land datascape. You can click, please. Yes. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about our pillars of work. And particularly, if you can click just one more, I think you also, I'm going to focus on, we have 3 pillars. Sorry, yes. One is on the knowledge creation and curation. The second one is our work where we do advocacy on open land data, providing advice and doing also some campaigns around it. And thirdly, we have our pillar of work that it's really about building the community around land issues globally. Within this pillar of work, we are organizing a lot of the webinars that perhaps you are also receiving information about. And right now I'm going to focus more on these two pillars, number 1 and number 2. You can, next slide, please. Yeah, so the context in which we work and why the land portal exists as such is precisely because we realize that the land data ecosystem is quite complex, and there are a lot of issues in this ecosystem. One is that there is a lot of information that is dispersed across different themes, across different types of ministries, for example, that are working on land issues. Another issue is also that you do sometimes find a lot of information, but this information is not always very well organized. Sometimes this information is also of poor quality, and very often the information is not accessible and not entirely open. It may be sometimes accessible, but sometimes you might find, for example, data sets that you find in terms of graphics in certain websites, but you cannot really manipulate, download that data. Or you find sites where you have to pay a subscription to be able to access that information. That's typically the case. You all know about peer-reviewed journals that you have to pay a subscription to access that information. So this is the space in which we are working and some of the challenges that we are trying to overcome. Compounded with by also other infrastructural problems and structural problems in society. We have a lot of people in the global south that still have very limited internet access. And you also have the poor data infrastructures. So websites that are not very well maintained, that are presenting a lot of information, but it's not really labeling that information. So a lot of people may not know what to do with that information. Next slide, please. Yes, so then we start with here the pillar of work, which I coordinate on the knowledge creation and curation to try to address all these issues that I just talked about. We have a series of knowledge, what we call knowledge products, that is trying to synthesize information and translate complex data in the land space. This is really information that is meant for people that are not necessarily experts in the topic, but as an entry point to understand more. And Rick, who is with us here today, also is wearing a double hat, as Rick is also part of our group of researchers who develops many of these knowledge products. So we have, for example, the country profiles. By now we have been able to develop 84 profiles, which are describing the land governance situations in many countries. And we also have something called the data stories. These are narratives that are providing some more information, like a story really on particular land challenge and how it's been addressed. And we're trying to feature a lot of the statistical data that is behind the arguments of that particular situation. We also have the thematic portfolios that tries to give not from a geographical perspective, but the thematic perspective on how certain issues that relate to land is cross-cutting also with a lot of other issues, such as, for example, land and climate change, how land and gender also the interplay of these two aspects. Next slide, please. The other work that we do is on the data curation. So we are aggregating and curating a lot of publications, news, blogs, and again, with a very global perspective. It can be issues related at the global level, at the national level, at the local level. And here we are really trying to privilege information that are coming from the Global South and from the not so usual sources of information. Land Portal is an open platform for anyone to subscribe and post information freely. And we do this precisely to give this space for people who may not maybe get all the attention in other spaces, maybe don't have the skills. It's to give them this space to feature the work that they do. Next slide, please. Yes, and I'm coming to an end here, which is, this is another type of work that we do on the statistical and spatial data sets, where we are collecting data from various sources and putting this data available in open formats, so people can really download, and particularly researchers can manipulate this data. Next slide, please. Yes, yes, here we come to our advocacy work that we do on land data governance. We have done this particularly through what we call the State of Land Information Assessment, and the one that you see here was actually done together with Mark, who's with us today, and also an Open Up Guide, which is a guide that informs the government how they can take best practices in opening up data that most often the government is the custodians for on land issues. We believe that opening up land data is really key for transparency. It provides also inclusion for people to be able, an opportunity for people to be able to understand what information about land is open, is available, and ultimately leading to more land access and land rights. Next one, please. Yes, this is just quickly to let you know, we are now in the process of developing an index that evolves from these state of land information assessments, where we are assessing countries in how open is land data there, how open is land data around the world. We are doing this both at the national level, but also then at the global level, reviewing all different types of land data. Here you have, for example, also on the legal and policy aspects, on land tenure data, on land use data, and so on, and coming up with scores that measure both the completeness of this data and the openness. And this will then provide a national score for the country. We are aware of the risk of simplifying a little bit this information. However, we do believe that this is more of a guide, and we are working really closely with a few governments to use this so they can understand this as a guide for them to plan for changes in how they manage land data. So here I come to an end. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, Cesar, if I went over a little bit the time.
You saved 5 minutes. So thank you very much. It gives us some additional time for questions. I'm sure a lot of us have got questions, but please, as Mark said earlier, write those in the chat or hold them up for the open discussion session. Thank you very much, Romy. Our next speaker is Rick. Rick, I don't know if you want to say a few words before you start. Renee, can you cue the...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cesar. Just to introduce myself, Romy has already provided my linkages with the land portal. So it's interesting how this discussion's being structured. So we're going from the land portal, which is this massive, great website with thousands and thousands of resources. It's been going for a long time. And we're then zooming down to a local scale, relatively tiny and completely, as you will discover, completely unfunded website that runs on the sniff of an oil rag and volunteerism. And then we're going to go out again to the large international land coalition. So it's an interesting structure. I have prepared a video for this afternoon to make sure that I stayed in the time, and I'm going to ask Renee to cue that for us now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Renee, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, I'm just sorting out the sound. It will play shortly.
Thanks.
Knowledge Base Land, or KBL for short, is a small, specialized website which was launched in 2018. This is a project of the long-established land sector non-government organization Pushlisani, which is based in Cape Town, South Africa. Pushlisani aims to provide analysis of the much-contested land question in South Africa, while providing up-to-date news from across the southern, central, and eastern African regions. We caught up with the website curator Dr. Rick Desache to ask how it all got started.
KBL has its origins in the prolonged and heated debates around land reform in South Africa. The website was launched in 2018 in response to the deepening polarization and increasing misinformation about land issues in the country. Some context may be helpful here. The Jacob Zuma presidency between 2009 and 2017 is widely regarded to have enabled deep-seated corruption and the capture of state institutions and procurement processes for elite gain. During this period, the failures of the land reform program and the unresolved land question in South Africa acquired enormous political potency. This was skillfully exploited by contesting political formations. In February 2017, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, a small but growing opposition party, proposed a motion in Parliament to amend Section 25, or the Property Rights Clause, of the Constitution. The proposed amendment sought to legitimize state expropriation of land without payment of compensation. Although the notion was initially rejected by the ANC majority, the embattled President Zuma, facing calls for his impeachment and prosecution, also endorsed land expropriation without compensation as part of a program of so-called radical economic transformation. However, following mass protests and a deep split in the ruling ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa succeeded Zuma as president in December 2017. But the unresolved land question refused to go away. In 2018, the EFF reintroduced a parliamentary notion to amend Section 25, now proposing state custodianship of all land. Instead of rejecting the motion outright as they did before, the ANC substantially amended the notion, which passed in Parliament. This called for a constitutional review committee to oversee public hearings on the need to amend the Constitution, and if so, what form this should take. The constitutional review process galvanized South African society. It was against this backdrop that Puhlisani was approached by a major bank to author a series of research reports on the evolution of land policy and prepare an analysis of the different aspects of the land reform program. As an NGO, Puhlisani was hesitant to accept research commissioned by the banking sector, but eventually we accepted on condition that all the research outputs would be open access and would be made freely available as a contribution to the national conversation. At the same time, we recognized that on their own, lengthy and detailed reports would probably not do much to inform public debate, so we proposed the establishment of the KBL website. This aimed to provide accessible and reliable information on all land-related issues in South Africa, along with the compilation and analysis of land-related news. With startup funding secured, the website was launched in October 2018. We promoted the website through a Twitter account and a podcast series, and things all went well to start with. Land reform was a national talking point. However, The first COVID patient was confirmed in South Africa on March the 1st, 2020. Land issues were quickly overtaken by the global pandemic. Unsurprisingly, funding for the website quickly dried up. The pandemic enabled a new wave of state corruption and price gouging. The lockdowns, corruption scandals, and blackouts due to the collapse of the power grid all contributed to a mounting national economic and employment crisis. This served to divert attention away from the need for effective rural and increasingly urban land reform. These issues are only beginning to rise up the national agenda again as parties try to persuade the electorate to support them in the upcoming national elections.
So that's the KBL origin story. Given what you have described, I would have expected the website to have closed down years ago. So, what it is that has enabled you to keep going?
Well, I guess you can say that KBL's a passion project, something that we see as making a contribution to a shared knowledge commons to develop deeper understanding about land issues across the region. We've tried to realize this vision by forging connections with local and international land networks. So I work part-time for the land portal researching African country profiles and issue pages, and KBL helps to promote these and other land portal knowledge products. Putlisani is also part of the Land Network National Engagement Strategy, LandNES, in South Africa. This is a civil society initiative that has received support from the International Land Coalition to promote people-centered land governance.
We still have a few minutes, so it would be great if you could give us a quick tour of the website architecture.
Sure, okay. So, like all websites, there's a home page and a page with information about the site, which also provides links to other resources available through our networks. The remainder of the site combines a mix of dynamic and more static resource pages. The Land News section provides dynamic content, which is frequently updated, and to date we've curated links to almost 6,000 news articles, which are organized into several different categories. Unfortunately, when the funding dried up, we were forced to scale back some of our operations. One of the casualties here was the detailed hyperlink commentary on key trends emerging from the latest news across the different categories. This, in my view, was probably our most valuable and informative product, some 50,000 words in extent, with thousands of hyperlinks, but it was too resource intensive to compile without support. Despite this, we have a comprehensive archive which provides analysis of more than 2 years of land-related news, which I think is a valuable resource for researchers. This and the spreadsheet, which contains all the news resources collected to date, are publicly available from Google Drive. The other more static content pages are updated less frequently. Given the centrality of land law, we have a page which explains land rights as guaranteed by the South African Constitution, as well as the processes through which land can be expropriated. Then we have a section on the different land rights settings, which comprise the landscape, the farms, communal areas, urban land, etc. These pages are primarily of interest to people wanting to better understand particular parts of the situation in South Africa.
Great. Thanks for the quick tour. You may be a small unfunded website, but there is clearly a lot of content here. Before we conclude, I have one last question. How should websites like KBL, the Land Portal and the ILC help us to better understand land issues, so as to anticipate the future?
Great question. Our collective abilities to make sense of the rapidly changing global and local contestations over land, water and minerals can help us to understand the past and to navigate both the present and the future. To date, the organizations in the land sector have placed a lot of emphasis on the availability and openness of land governance information and data. We have drawn on this data to design all sorts of metrics and indices. However, in the age of big data, and the hallucinatory interventions of AI. Perhaps we're going to need to think much harder about data veracity, about how data is collected, about the biases and assumptions that simultaneously influence what is being measured and what is being ignored or overlooked. We like to tell stories with data, but we are going to need to develop new era forensic skills to identify biases and the insertion of manufactured facts that will be increasingly embedded in datasets. This is going to require collaboration and skills development to help contextualize data collection, fact check, and provide critical analysis. I think this is going to be essential if we are to reliably interpret our world and resist the seductive but frequently false promises that numbers can somehow magically provide the keys to understanding. Thank you. That's all from me.
Sure, Rick. Thank you very much. That last statement around reliably interpreting the world with the data, sure. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I think as our next speakers, we'll start with Ava set up. I think just reflecting on, the intensity of the information, the land information that's available out there, and I'm hoping that the questions are going to be ready for our panel discussion, or after our panel discussion. Ava, over to you. You're in presentation mode. Perfect.
Thank you so much, and thanks also to fellow panelists for the interesting presentations. I will focus on giving an overview of the way in which we work in ILC and our mission and goal. And then my colleague Mariela will speak a little bit more around our data work and how we work on data. Next slide, please. So by way of introduction, the International Land Coalition is a network of civil society organizations, development partners, and other organizations working in different sectors, but who are pursuing people-centered land governance. Globally, we have a total of over 300 organizations, and we are all spread across different regions. That is Africa, we have Latin America and the Caribbean, we have Asia, and we have Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. For this presentation, I'll focus more on Africa. And in Africa, which is the largest network, we have a total of 95 members who are spread across 28 countries in the region. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what's our common goal? Our goal is to pursue people-centered land governance by shifting power to women, men, communities who live on and from land. So in that sense, we seek to pursue people-centered land governance as a pathway to addressing some of the key common global challenges that we continue to face. Next slide, please. So these include looking at how secure land tenure can be a pathway to addressing issues of unsustainable food systems. Also using secure land tenure systems as a way of addressing the inequalities in terms of access to land rights for women and other marginalized groups. Equally, using secure land rights as a pathway to addressing the climate crisis, which is again one of the emerging areas of focus for us as a region. And then finally, addressing issues of shrinking civic spaces through secure land tenure. And so for us, land tenure security is not an end in itself, but a means towards also addressing broader global challenges. So within our new strategy, next slide, please. Within our new strategy, which runs between 2022 to 2030, we are focusing on 3 key strategic priorities. And the first one is around working with multi-stakeholder platforms at national level to influence key policies and practices around land governance. And the multi-stakeholder platforms at national level is what we refer to as the National Land Coalitions. And then secondly, we seek to generate people-centered people-driven data so as to inform advocacy and also hold corporations and actors accountable. And then finally, to work on regional and global advocacy as a way of building political will to support people-centered land governance. So in terms of our implementation framework, sorry, I forgot to mention finally within our strategy, next slide, sorry. Some cross-cutting pledges. These are really aspects that we mainstream into our programming. And this is around the gender justice aspect. That is the commitment to ensure that we break cycles of gender injustices by integrating gender justice approaches within our programming and also within our governance structures. And this is done through various initiatives, such as supporting our platforms to conduct gender audits and also implement gender action plans that seek to advance gender justice. And then the second cross-cutting pledge is around defending land defenders, which is a commitment to support frontline communities who find themselves in situations of threats and human rights violations because of their work. And in Africa, we have various mechanisms such as an emergency fund that is meant to provide protective and preventive measures to support our network members. And also through our regional platforms, we work to provide more proactive approaches to protection, including capacity building and advocacy, among others. Next slide. So how then are we implementing these strategies? Like I mentioned, our key approach to implementation is through multi-stakeholder platforms at national and regional level. And at national level, our members have organized themselves into national land coalitions that brings together various actors at the local and national level to advance policy changes. And currently, we have a total of 13 national land coalitions. There's one NLC I haven't included here because it's a new one. But so far we have a national land coalition in Burkina Faso, in Cameroon, in Congo, in DRC, in Kenya, Liberia, Madagascar, Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, Togo, and Uganda. And our newest multi-stakeholder platform is in Burundi, which was established this year. And then at the regional level, we work together with the regional platforms, and the regional platforms really bring together our members from different countries to work on specific thematic areas. And currently we have a total of 8 active regional platforms that work on various themes. The first one is around small-scale family farming and how secure land tenure could really advance the work of small-scale family farmers and as well as address issues of unsustainable food systems. The other area is around pastoralism and securing rangelands as well as advancing restoration for better livelihoods. So this is regional platform 3 that really works very closely with pastoralist organizations to address issues of secure land tenure in that context. And then another platform that is really very critical for us is on equal land rights for women, where the regional platform works on various campaign initiatives as a contribution to addressing the gap as far as women access to land rights for women is concerned. And currently they are implementing initiatives such as the Stand for Her Land campaign that seeks to bridge the policy implementation gap, or rather translate policy on paper into practice by ensuring that women actually secure land as provided for in the law. And then in regional platform 5 looks at issues of indigenous peoples and communities, as well as securing their territorial rights. The other one is around locally managed ecosystems, where the platform here seeks to advance community-led conservation and restoration initiatives and address violations that also come as a result of various conservation initiatives. Platform 7 looks at inclusive decision making. Again, here I think the issue of transparency in terms of land data is one key component, but also ensuring accountability in terms of land governance and inclusivity in decision-making processes. Regional platform 10 is one that combines 2 interrelated aspects, which is the protection of environmental defenders, land and environmental defenders, but also addressing issues of land grabbing, which are often associated with violations and threats to defenders. Finally, one of our youngest platforms is the Youth and Land Multi-Stakeholder Platform, which was established in order to ensure that young people are included in conversations around land grabbing, around land governance, and that they are also able to influence decisions in terms of land governance. So this, in a nutshell, are the key multi-stakeholder platforms and processes that we work through in order to advance advocacy around land governance issues. I will allow Mariela to also introduce more broadly around our work on data, and which relates to our strategic objective too.
Thank you so much, Eva, for introducing the broader spectrum of how ILC works and the different areas we tackle. My name is Mariela Schlingloff. I'm part of ILC's global data and land monitoring team. And as mentioned already by Eva, I will introduce to you our data collection tool, which is called Landex. Landex is a global land governance index that puts people at the center of land data, democratizing land monitoring and building a data ecosystem where all voices can be heard. In order to explain to you what Landex is in a nutshell, we need to keep in mind the following points. So first of all, when Landex was created, it was created with the idea of responding to the lack and to the need for people-centered data, especially when it comes to land data that, as we have already heard from the other 2 presentations, is particularly scarce. So the aim of Landex is to shed light on key issues of land governance and gathering inputs from people belonging to different sectors. This as a consequence, fosters an inclusive data collection and especially the engagement with populations that usually are underrepresented, such as women, youth, indigenous peoples, local communities, as well as defenders. Landex also has the goal of filling existing data gaps and complement data sources, data sets, as well as existing frameworks with complementary data that is built on people direct contribution and can inform frameworks such as the SDGs and the VGGTs, for example. All of this leads to fostering standardized data ecosystems. This also means that Landex was not created with the idea of reinventing the wheel. As we have already seen through Land Portal, there are many sources of information. There are established and recognized methodologies when it comes to collecting data also in the land sector. The main issue is that this data is often dispersed and very hard to link together. So when Landex was created, the idea was to pull together these different initiatives, these different data sources, and the existing methodology, and bring them together into one tool in order to make the generation and the use of data accessible to everyone. So the way that Landex is built is according to ILC's 10 thematic commitments toward people-centered land governance, which were also slightly now mentioned by Eva and showed, let's say, in practice how this works throughout the workflow of ILC. But when it comes to data, we use these 10 commitments to align our indicators, meaning that the thematic areas we cover in our data tool spread from secure tenure rights to strong small-scale farming systems, diverse tenure systems, equal land rights for women, secure territorial rights for indigenous people, locally managed ecosystems, inclusive decision-making, transparent and accessible information, effective action against land grabbing, and finally, the protection of land right defenders. According to these 10 commitments, ILC tries to cover each of them for 3 levels. The first level looks at the legal and institutional framework in place in each country to the corresponding thematic commitment it is inquisiting. The second level, the level B, looks at the implementation of the legal framework. And the last level, the level C, looks at the outcomes, the results, and the impact of that of the implementation. This allows us to have a full image of how each of the commitment is doing in different countries. To give you an idea how this looks in practice and what kind of results we can see from the data, I will quickly show you the example of our commitment 4, which looks at the equal land rights for women. You can see that the legal frameworks asks for the gender responsiveness of the legal and institutional framework in place in one country. The implementation level asks for the share of agricultural land that is held by women that are also recognized as agricultural owners and right bearers. And finally, the result indicator will look at the perception of tenure security by women in the specific country. To give this a little bit more of meat and make this more reliable, we would like to display some of these results from the data collection we did in South Africa in 2021. You can see that for the first indicator, so level A, South Africa reached a score of 35, which indicates that in South Africa, over time, there was a moderate advances in the legal framework to secure women's land rights. For the implementation of it, we can see that for indicator 4B, South Africa has reached a score of 33, indicating that 33% of agricultural land is held by women in South Africa is held by women that are recognized as agricultural owners and right bearers. And finally, for as far as the tenure security perception goes, we can see that 70% of rural women in South Africa perceive their tenure rights to be secure. And this is data we gathered through Prindex. So once again, an example of reducing data fragmentation. The scores are on a scale from 0 to 100, where 0 represents the lowest score possible and 100 the highest score possible. As long that for the methodologies, the most represented methodology in Landex, the most prominent one, the one you see in yellow, green, mustardy, are the people-based indicators. These are indicators which rely on questionnaires and surveys, where we seek to get different respondents from different sectors in order to understand how these different people perceive issues of land governance according to the commitment and the indicator they are replying to. Then we have calculation and numerical indicators. These are the ones in gray. These are indicators that look at quantitative data. So these are specific numbers that can be already existing numbers, for example, the share of land held by women or the Gini coefficient. Usually some of these numbers can be found in official data or through national census, for example. Then we have global survey indicators. These are specific indicators where we rely on data partner initiatives, which have been, let's say, identified as expert for the topic covered in the indicator. And hence we rely on them on their data to feed these indicators in Landex. One of them, for example, is Landmark, Prindex, and now recently also we have Land Portal and Transparency International feeding into Commitment 8, and Land Portal through the SOLI index, which was presented before by Romy. So before finishing and leaving space for questions, just to quickly summarize what has been achieved over the last 5 years now with Landex ever since it was implemented for the first time. We were able to collect data in over 30 countries, where most of them have our national land coalitions, which are this big body of members that we have in the different countries. As far as it goes for Africa, this implies full data sets for South Africa, Cameroon, Uganda, Kenya, Togo, Senegal, and Liberia. And the way that these countries have decided to use their data has a lot of variation, and is primarily determined by the implementing team, or most likely by the National Land Coalition, who is, let's say, the driving organ of the data collection and sets the priority for us to understand how they want to use the data and where are the priorities. But in broader spectrum, if we want to tackle how we use the data for advocacy and accountability, we can say that based on the experiences of Landex and over the last 5 years, we were able to make people's data more legitimate, especially also riding the wave of the recognition of citizen science and the momentum it's gaining for people's data to be recognized as a fundamental element to feed information, to make great contributions to existing frameworks and data processes and reporting processes where data is lacking, and hence people's data can provide great additional information that provides more context and more specific information about target groups that overall data is not able to cover. This, for example, has allowed us to use Landex data to translate it into different international frameworks, such as the SDGs, the VGGTs, CEDAR reporting, among others. And of course, probably the most obvious one, which was basically the leading idea of using the data in Landex, is that the data can be used for national and regional advocacy processes, depending on the product that has been identified or the advocacy space that has been identified as the target one. We can, through country assessments or analytical reports, which reflect directly Landex data to and links it to the accountability space where the data is going to be presented. Finally, although much has been achieved and much has been learned through Landex, Landex is not a perfect tool. As many of the other data tools, it's on a constant learning curve, adapting and improving. And given that ILC as well as Landex is a member-led organization, we rely on feedback and consultations with our members, with the National Land Coalition and platforms, in order to really understand where the needs are, what the priorities are, and how can we improve to make our data collection more efficient and targeted or tailored to the needs of each party. So on one end, we were able to reduce data fragmentation by building new partnerships, as mentioned before, for example, by now adding the SOLI index as, let's say, the leading organism for one of our indicators about transparency and accessibility of land information, as well as Transparency International. We were able to build regional data packages, which will now make the data collection in the different regions more specific to their needs and the priorities that have been identified in consultations. But this is, again, more flexible as well when it comes to the country, where based on the feedback we get from the National Land Coalitions, we are able to adapt and include indicators that are relevant to each context. And finally, we were able to expand the cover of some of our indicators, especially the ones related to youth and climate, so that we are able to better follow and state how youth and high climate is doing, and especially how this is developing within the context of land. This is all from my end. Just quickly inviting you also to look in the chat where some links are going to be shared. On one end, if you are interested in knowing more about how what has been achieved through Landex, you will find a report about the 4 years of peoples-based data, where you can see concrete achievements and what the numbers tells us based on Landex data. You will also see a concrete example on how Landex data transfers into SDGs with the example of the Senegal SDG report. And you're freely invited to look at our website, browse around it, explore it, and of course, look at our data if you're interested to know more about it. I'll stop sharing my screen and give it back to you, Sitsu.
Thanks, Mariella and Ava. I'd like to invite you back on the platform, Romy, Rick, and Ava, and Mark. And they'll be having a panel discussion. And thanks, Romy, for answering some of the questions that have come up already in the chat. And I think as the questions are going to be asked now, Mark is posing 2 questions. Also, do remember to add your questions in the chat. I'll handle those a bit later. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much. Lots to think about, lots to process. Yeah, I'd really encourage people to go and look at the different ways the platforms work. And there's a lot to look at and to work with. So there's 2 questions. We'll I see there's already quite a few questions in the chat. We'll come back to that in the open time, but you're welcome to carry on posting there. For the first question, it's about advocacy and impact. Mariella's just been answering a lot of that. In terms of the order now, I think if we go with Eva and Mariella first, because it's fresh in our minds, what you've just been saying. So what's your model of advocacy? I think it's evident from what you've been saying. There's open access, there's empowerment, there's participation, there's very clear indicators, there's influence of these international agreements and indicator systems. So what's your model of advocacy from the ILC Landex side to say, now, who do you go and influence? Who do you talk to bring this message? How do you create the impact from this data that you want to have? And then how do you know when you've succeeded? Obviously, on the ground, if you're seeing positive transformation, empowerment, improved quality of life, that's your on the ground impact. But how do you see it from an advocacy perspective? When do you know that you're getting purchase and you're actually changing the way the big actors are working? But you can decide, Mariella, Eva, which way who would like to just make you can both comment and which order.
Okay, maybe I'll just quickly start with the Landex part, and then I give the floor to Eva to tackle the more institutional part. When it comes to Landex and Landex data, I think the main point that really stands out is that Landex really wants to put people that are afflicted at the end by the decisions made about land policies at the center of all stages of the data cycle, so to say, not only data collection, but data validation and data use. This includes them also as part of the validation group of the data and the focus group discussions, which are specific settings where we put together targeted groups indicated usually by the national land coalitions, the RCU and the platforms that target, for example, women or youth or indigenous people. And we try to bring them all together to discuss the findings, to discuss the data. They have been involved also previously in providing information, and then to sit together and formulate concrete policies recommendations for the improvement and the strengthening of their tenure rights. This can then also be transferred to the SDGs for the achievement of the SDGs. Once these recommendations are done, we usually try to reach out, and here is the fundamental rule of our regional coordination unit and the NLCs, to present these findings to the relevant stakeholders. Maybe the latest success story was with a project called Land Monitor, which was done together also with IFAD, which is in the National Fund for Agriculture Development based in Rome. And with them, we did the same process, and we reached out to the government in the Philippines, as well as the IFAD country office, which was part of the project. And in both cases, we managed that on one side, the IFAD office included into their COSOP, which is the strategy, to integrate Landex data and put finally land tenure as one of their goals. And as part for the government, the statistical authority in the Philippines has acknowledged our data and considered to apply our methodology as well to their settings.
Okay,
now
great.
to
Thank
you, Eva, for the more general overview.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And to just build on what Mariela said, I think the multi-stakeholder platforms and processes have really done well in terms of contextualizing challenges and identifying common priorities. And they've been able to use data collected to engage policymakers. And if I can speak a little bit about some of the results we've realized in the past year, various national land coalitions have been able to influence around 14 policies at national level due to the engagements they have with government and different actors. I can mention an example of the DRC, where last year they were able to push for the enactment of a law that recognizes the rights of indigenous peoples. And this is because of the collective effort of civil society organizations in that context. We've also seen opportunities or successes in terms of influencing various agendas. For example, currently we have a number of national land coalitions who are engaging in a review of national land policies, and they've positioned themselves within different working groups and technical drafting committees within different ministries to be able to influence. And so for us, how we measure our impact is the extent to which recommendations, policy briefs from the multi-stakeholder platforms are able to ultimately inform policies that are being developed. But also a lot of work has gone into actually securing tenure rights for communities. And there is a number of multi-stakeholder platforms that are supporting communities to be able to engage in processes of land regularization and titling as a way of securing land tenure. For example, in Uganda, there's been a lot of success around securing titles for women, which is again one of the successes that has come about due to the the multi-stakeholder platform work.
Okay, brilliant. Romy, can I come to you next? And Rick, can I leave you for last if that's okay? So also at that international scale for Romy, your model of advocacy, where you try to get influence, how you know if you've succeeded.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Yes, well, it's a big question for us as well. And let me start by saying that because here, I think when we talk about impact, we have to consider two main areas of work of the land portal now, in terms of impact. One is about all the part that I showed on knowledge curation, the part of the platform that we are still aggregating information to make that available, with the idea that by making more information accessible and open to the community, people will be empowered, and also empowered by participating in debate. So here I'm talking about this pillar 1 and 3 of our work. There, in terms of impact, it's quite tricky to measure, as you can imagine, because our audience is also very global, very dispersed, very diverse as well. So here, the way we have been measuring till now has been really by systematically looking, of course, at our users, our web analytics. We have been conducting over the last, I think, 6 years, if not more, user surveys every year to really try to understand our audience and the needs that they have. Perhaps here we cannot really talk about impact. For those of you who are academics and do monitoring and evaluation, perhaps this is really more about results that we have. And one way to try to get to an impact level is we have been developing over the last 2 years something we call the outcome harvests interviews, where we select some people and we try to fix calls with them to really understand whether there was a change as a result in their work, in the way they do things, as a result of having access or interacting with information provided by the land portal or any activity that we have promoted. And we are collecting interesting stories. For example, we had somebody who collaborated with us in a data story, and it's a researcher based in Southeast Asia. He was saying that before doing this data story with us, basically the information that he also provided in the data story was only published in journals. And with that information, it was very difficult for him to get any attention from policymakers. And it was only after he published the data story, he realized that he got such a level of attention that people started calling him. And indeed, in the beginning, not such a nice call, because actually the information, I think, was quite controversial for him as a researcher. So, but he realized that by annoying some people, people were actually reading the results of his research. So these are the types of stories that we try to collect in terms of impact. Now, regarding our real advocacy work, because to be clear, we do not do advocacy directly on land rights. Our advocacy is on opening up data, on good land data governance. And that area of work is fairly new. So I think for us, it's still very difficult to talk about impact. But what we are trying to do is to really not only do these country assessments about how open and complete the information, land data information is in the countries, and also collaborating with Landex, with the Soil Index, but also really doing the outreach to governments. And here we really focus on governments because of our capacity also, that to make sure that governments can uptake this information. And we try through this outreach and closely coordinating with them, see if there is any entry point for them to perhaps say the information that before was all sitting somewhere, in paper-based, becomes digital. And that's already going to be a gain for us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Right, Rick, you did pose the question why you juxtaposed, and I think because it'll also be the second panel question as a local partner, but also much closer to the ground. It's a different type of advocacy and a different, well, possibly different way of seeing if there's uptake and influence. But yeah, I mean, how would you like to comment on that from your side and your experience?
I think it's very difficult to answer this question, Mark, from where I sit. Knowledge-based land is a small dog barking in the night. And the voice of the dog is getting increasingly hoarse. I think you will have gathered from the video is that I am a data skeptic. And my on-the-ground work in South Africa has raised very difficult questions about the currency of data as purporting to be fact. Data is something that is political, it is manipulated, it is influenced, and very often it's downright false. As you will see as we go into the run-up to the elections in South Africa, there are going to be numerous people who are going to tell us numerous things about who owns how much land and where, and they're going to create a lot of confusion in the process. So I take this back in a way to some years ago. I was part of a World Bank team that was doing a land governance assessment framework for South Africa. And I found the process deeply revealing because the World Bank report in the end, I basically was like a dissenting voice from the conclusions because it was based on data which, as far as I could see, was highly questionable. If we take the South African example, we have been contesting for years how much land is owned by who, how much is owned by whites, how much is owned by companies, how much land has been transferred through land reform. Are we close to the 30%? Are we far away from the 30%? And I don't think that anybody in this domain has convincing answers. I think the same for the built environment professionals. If we look at the housing space and we look at informal settlements and we look at urbanization in South Africa, our data there is also hugely contested, I think. The government will tell us how many houses have been constructed or whatever, or how many work opportunities have been created. So I think what I want to insert into this discussion is a deep skepticism about the credibility and veracity of the data which we are coming up with. How are we ensuring that we are adequately fact-checking and assessing and critically interpreting the data that we get given? Having done a country profile of Rwanda, for example, Rwanda is one of the countries that is particularly good at coming up with data sets which tell us how successful it is. If you look at its land sector, it will tell us that like everybody has had their land registered. And yet recent research has shown that almost a significant percentage of land transactions are now informal. Why? So this is a difficult landscape, and I think with the insertion of AI and the manufacture of data, it's going to be something we're going to have to stay on our toes if we're going to remain credible. Thank you.
I must admit to some sympathy with your view, Rick. I think it's that challenge of working on the ground and then the data percolating up and then working in very large international data sets. And at some stage, there can be a disconnect between what's actually being seen on the ground. My latest example is our South African census that says that 8% of people live in informal housing. And when we look at our remote sensing, so that's 8% is a halving of the number of households since the last census, that 10-year period. And when we look at our remote sensing data, 25% of residential units are shacks. So somewhere between 8% and 25%, or even 30% is reality. So yeah, I think that ground truthing is so important. Right. And then, yeah, the final sort of just on in the panel discussion, it's almost like a group question. I'm going to start back with you, Rick, and then come back through the process. It's almost like you as partners, you've described your different roles at different levels. Romy made it clear that it's more about advocacy on the open data. And I think the ILC colleagues talked more about the much more rights-based indicators and change. But just reflecting on how do you partner with one another? Rick as a local partner to, in this case, but not only to Land Portal, but to others. I think you've already started to talk about that. And then between Romy and Mariella and Eva, how do you see yourself relating to one another? So in other words, are you finding platforms that you pull together on, even with what Rick has said about constantly challenging, but are there ways that you are working together and playing different roles? Rick, can I start back with you?
Yes, I'll be very brief on this. I mean, I think I'm in a slightly compromised position here because I do work part-time for the Land Portal. So there is a relationship between us, and I produce research reports for them. But Puhlisani has had a previous relationship with the Land Portal where we help to populate the resource library with information and reports from South Africa. And then, of course, with the ILC connection, I mean, I'm at far removed, but there is the coalition that Eva was talking about, the Landness arrangement, the multi-stakeholder platforms, which have had a difficult time of it, I think, in South Africa. COVID was one of the things which really knocked these things, but also, I mean, like trying to engage with the state when the state is like absolutely arrogantly dismissive of civil society in the main, except for a few tame organizations that eat at the table. So again, I think we have to recognize the state civil society relationships and how they vary from country to country, and not to sugarcoat and gloss these things. I think that many of the civil society organizations in South Africa are, you know, like increasingly, well, not even increasingly, but deeply frustrated with the lack of traction that they have and the lack of the policy ear. And you can have data, you can be telling stories, but it doesn't necessarily change state behavior. Other things do. And we've seen how that happens in South Africa. And that's usually organization, and unfortunately, increasingly violent organization from below in order to get basic services, in order to get the attention of the state. And this is a very worrying turn of events. Thank you.
Romy, can I give you a chance, a bit of reflection on how you as an international organization relate to other, like ILC and across others?
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's Rick already preempted the discussion here. Exactly. We work together producing a lot of these knowledge products, and Rick, as a data skeptic, is exactly the kind of researcher we want to have in our team, because I think it provides this devil's advocate perspective that is absolutely important for our work as well. So also in the process of the SOLI index, to firm that up, Rick has been attending at least a few of our discussions, and it's super important to have this kind of views also for our work, to recognize also and that's part of this collaboration that we have, to recognize where we can complement each other, when we will have criticisms and be prepared to answer some of these questions. We realize, for example, with the SOLI index, and we do this data collection basically assessing databases, websites online. So it's basically a desktop research. And there is the risk here of simplifying information that is fairly complex, even though we do believe that we don't want to claim that this should be the only reference that you should use. Absolutely not. And this is why it's complementary to a lot of other data initiatives. And here we come to this collaboration with Landex, who also has a much bigger structure than we do with the ILC, with the possibility, the capacity to be also on the ground and coordinate this work with organizations on the ground. So for us, we see our role really more sitting at the global level, not having really the capacity to be at the ground level, but absolutely important to connect to those actors who do have this capacity to be a bit of the fact checker and really to bring some reality also to the work that we are doing.
Great. Thanks, Romy.
Thanks.
Eva, would you like to comment on ILC's networks, relationships, co-working with others?
Yes, sure. So yeah, I think like I've mentioned before, for us, the collective advocacy within the multi-stakeholder platforms are a key avenue for us to work together in terms of collective advocacy. Like they always say, there's power or strength in numbers. And so the efforts at country level, at regional level, has been how do we leverage the strengths and value that the different members of the coalition bring to the table. So I think that collective advocacy that tries to link advocacy from the local level to the national to the regional to the global has really proved to be useful. And then within the multi-stakeholder platforms themselves, I acknowledge the differences between different contexts, like Rick said, but at least what we've seen work in some cases has been strategic partnership, both with government, private actors, and other strategic partners. So currently, for example, we are working to develop some lessons and learnings from multi-stakeholder platforms where we've seen impactful partnerships between government and civil society. And this is a learning exchange that we will be holding in Uganda in June to just share how government and CSO partnership can really help advance policy influencing at different levels. I think also the other thing that that has come in handy is in terms of making our advocacy more people's organizations driven. When I say people's organization, I mean, the grassroots organizations, the grassroots organizations and the CBOs who really work on the ground and making sure that they play key roles within these multi-stakeholder platforms, making them very inclusive so that they co-develop their own strategies, but also co-implement in that sense in order to advance greater impact. And then finally, is the cross-country learning and exchange initiatives that we conduct as a coalition really helps advance, build knowledge, first of all, and also share lessons and reflections that others could either replicate or learn from in order to design more impactful approaches within their context. So I think generally that is how it works for us within the different multi-stakeholder platforms. Marielle, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
No, yes, besides echoing the responses, the replies from Rick, Romy, and Eva, I think luckily we are already in the position where the three of us are really already taking to our advantage and linking our work, not only providing data to one each other, but really learning from each and every one of our experiences and the work we do in the different countries, whether it is at national level with the work that Rick does, or at the more regional and global level like we do with Landex or with Land Portal. Maybe just the last practical sprinkle of how other ways we do collaborate is that we also organized joint trainings, especially through Landex, since this is sort of an umbrella initiative that tries to link in different data initiatives. We don't only train people on how to use our tool, but we also organize national and regional trainings where we invite our partner initiatives such as Land Portal, Twindex, Landmark, Land Matrix to also present their data initiatives, and depending on the priorities that are identified by the national land coalitions, we deepen this knowledge by providing specific trainings on how the different tools work in order to really spread awareness about the different tools that exist, the different data that can be gathered. And then we sit all together and try to understand what can we build together using the different sets of information we receive. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. I think I've got a much better understanding of this whole ecosystem of organizations and advocacy. It's really encouraging. Yeah, we'll certainly thank you for all your inputs. I think there's quite a few questions. I'm going to hand back to Nosizo to just see if there's specific ones that still need to be answered in the chat, or if people want to raise that. But thank you from my side. It's just been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, there are a few questions. There are some words of just appreciation for the work that's been done. I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right. I think it's Evan Kwija from, I think, the Cameroon is appreciating, but also asking, they would like to apply the methodology that was presented at regional level in Cameroon. I don't know, Evan, if you would like to ask the question yourself, or if you're happy with how I've posted.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be here, and I really appreciate the webinar. It's so informative, and now I'm in Cameroon in the North region, where we are addressing the issue of land governance between pastoralism, land use, and agriculture. So we are now expecting to collect many data to also to stock, to share, to create a partnership platform so that we could better manage and inform about the land use governance and the land conflict in here in the North region. So with C4 ICRAF, it's a project of C4 ICRAF. So there's much data to manage, data to collect, and it involves collaboration with local communities and public sector, and many NGO involved here in Cameroon. So I'm really interested on how Land Coalition and other platforms they have processed to reach those achievements, so that I can follow up to do that.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know if I don't think there's a question there. It's just
no, it's not. It's not a question. It's a request for collaboration.
Okay. Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, there was a question around where Landex gets its data from. They were questioning the 33% of land held by women in South Africa. And I think maybe I'll link it to Pierre Potgieter's question around whether Land Portal, Enric, you had talks with the Department of Agriculture, Land and Reform about opening data. So anyone can take that. Maybe let me call in Rick. Thanks, Rick.
I think unfortunately my colleague here, I think Siabu Manona, had to leave. He would be able to answer the question about talks with the department, because I think he's been involved in this for many years. Yeah, so I mean, South Africa is interesting because we are a signatory to the Open Government Partnership internationally, and there was a lot of mileage made of this open government, open data, open government approach in South Africa, but I think we haven't unfortunately lived up to that those pledges at all. So I mean, definitely the data does need to be opened up, and it does need to. We do need to be able to critically scrutinize it. I think that again, just reflecting on how difficult this actually is, because often it's about data integrity. You can take restitution claims in South Africa. You can take land that's been transferred through redistribution. And I have been practically involved in projects for 30 years plus, trying to provide support to some of these communities. And almost every time that we get a data set, whether it's from the Department of Agriculture or whether it's the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, the biggest part of doing anything is having to correct the data to start with, because a lot of the farms don't exist. There's duplicates. The data is very, very difficult to analyze and make sense of because it needs to be cleaned. One of the worst things, I'll give you an example about how data can get scrambled. In South Africa some years ago, there's something called NARISEC, which is the National Youth Program, the sort of Youth Opportunities Program. And NARISEC was given the opportunity to go to the Restitutions Commission's offices. And the idea was that they were going to digitize all of the handwritten land claim forms. They were going to scan them all and refile them. And in that process, South Africa lost enormous amounts of data because the scanning was done badly. The documents were put back to front. They weren't refiled back when they were finished. And as a result, we had a data deficit from a paper-based system that actually worked to a digital system that was nonsense. So these are the sorts of challenges that we have, and it's this perspective that when somebody says, and it's with greatest respect, it's not a criticism of Landex at all. You are going with the data that you're given by an official source, and in any circumstances, you would hope that that data is credible and reasonably accurate. Yes, it will have some wrinkles, but quite often that may not be the case. And I think what was spoken of earlier, the difference between the remote sensing and our national census. Our national census is supposed to be the most reliable set of data that we have about the country. And yet if we've got a huge margin of error about the number of people living in informal dwellings, it says something quite profound about the content of the data in our survey. And it says something even more profound about the conclusions that we draw from that. So, yeah, I'll rest my case there. Thank you.
There were quite. I don't know if anybody, Ava or Mariella, you'd like to say something. You could.
Sure. No, I just also to tag along to what Rick was saying. And I think this is a problem with when it comes to official data. And we highlight this as now using the example still of South Africa. Unfortunately, for many numerical data, the sources are limited. Let's say to counterbalance this, so what we try to do is do these validation sessions where we try to bring in comments and recommendations to counterbalance this data that sometimes is not the most accurate and in most cases is manipulated by, for example, the governments or the stakeholders in charge. So no, just sharing the same view that Rick was mentioning.
If I can come in also just to comment on what Rick is saying. Yes, this is absolutely important. It's a discussion that we need to have. But at the same time, I think it also, what Rick was saying is that it shows a lot about the example he gave on the data scramble. It shows a lot about how it can be scrambled and the conclusions that we are drawing from it. But it also exposed the situation, which perhaps otherwise about also the maybe lack of capacities, maybe intentionally or not, from public institutions to deal with that data, to change their systems. Because I think we need to be prepared for these changes. We need to walk this pathway of change, because this is inevitable. I do think that maybe the system which was paper-based was working, and I think this is a question that we are also asking ourselves a lot, that of course we are doing this advocacy for open data, which is in principle needs to be digitized to be open. But we do recognize that in a lot of countries, maybe what works for them is actually paper-based, because even how people think about data is not online, even because, you know, access to internet is such an issue that naturally they think about going to the next municipality office that they can to have information about births, about all sorts of issues in their lives. At the same time, we do feel that it is sort of an inevitable change that we are walking to here. I don't think we can also be stuck now in that discussion. But what I think it's also very helpful is that that the more data is open, it is exactly these kind of issues that can be brought to the surface, and that hopefully civil society will be empowered to explore precisely these shades of gray, these narratives, these issues, the problems with capacity and intentions of government. Thanks.
Thanks. A question just come through from Longole. She's asking, you didn't say who you're asking the question to. Longole, if you could maybe add that. What are the tools that are being used by our Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development for surveying customary land? I don't know who, I don't think there's, I'm not sure if there's, unless Rick, you can take that question if you understand it. Otherwise, Longole.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't. I don't know whether David Mason, who I see is still here. David, whether you have any knowledge through your work with some of the NGOs in this sector? Maybe, I'm not sure whether he's still with us. I can see his name there. No, I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry, Longole. Okay, so I just want to also appreciate lots of questions were answered by other colleagues on the chat, and there were quite a number that resonated with your skepticism on data, and I think that that's also come through in some of the comments. So I don't see any other comments. If you've posted a question and you don't feel that we've answered or addressed it, if you could maybe raise your hand. Romy? You muted, sorry.
Sorry, Cizo. Yes, I see a question from Pierre earlier, where he was addressing, I think, myself and Rick about whether we have been in talk none about with the departments of agriculture and how to solve this conflict of them wanting to sell the data versus us wanting to open the data. I will have, Pierre, in this question to forward your question to my colleague, Tommy. I don't know if Tommy is with us right now, who's actually the one leading this work that we do on opening up land data. On your second question about could open data practices like specific data license not help improve the quality and transparency? Yes, absolutely. This is one of the criteria to become open data. It is pretty much indicating what is the license, what are you authorizing other people that interact with this data to do. So, and ideally you are putting a Creative Commons or some kind of open license that do authorize people to manage your data in an open way.
I see Tommy did respond in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. If there are no more questions, I think we can start winding down. Okay, so the recording is being, we are recording the session, and the recording will be shared. Everybody that's registered will receive an email with all the details in the next few days. Longole is asking, which kinds of equipment is your organization using for surveying customary land? Okay, I think that may be a question that can be answered by one of you. Remy, you're unmuted. Were you? No.
No,
okay.
Not really. We are not really.
Well, maybe using Landex. One of the commitments in Landex is diverse tenure system and the other one is small scale farming systems. And both of them are based on surveys as well. Actually both A level and B levels are based on surveys. The A levels are answered by legal experts, and the B levels are, let's say, open for everyone to respond. And in both of these commitments and indicators, we inquire also customary land rights. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Mariela. Mark's just posted in our chat the previous recordings that we've had for the sessions. I think one of the things that's jumped out at me from today's session, there was a chat note that said land is power. Land is, there was just those single statements earlier. Just the land is identity. I think it's a very emotional, emotive topic, and highly contested. And that statement that you made earlier, Rick, about the interpreting of or the need for collaboration and skills development. I think we need to I think reliably interpret the data with reliable information. So very really challenging issue that we have. Mark, I'm going to hand over to you to close for us. If you can.
Yeah, no, I think I've put a couple of things in the chat about where you can access the information. I think we've been sharing our emails with each other as well, so you're welcome to get hold of each other. Yeah, no, just from my side, thank you so much. These large international partners have been a great support to us over the years, and also that we can reflect from the local to the international and then back down again, and that we can compare with colleagues across different countries and in different regions. I think South Africans, we tend to be quite isolated in some ways, so we don't always properly connect into these big international networks. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to hear about how these larger initiatives work and how you work together. And I think that's also a big lesson for us, is how we can work together in a common end, a common advocacy outcome that we're trying to achieve. So I don't think I need to add a lot more, just to thank you all, and thank you to my organizing group from behind the scenes. Keep an eye out for future webinar announcements, as well as the sort of recordings of this. But yeah, please just get hold of us if you have any follow-ups. But I'd really like to thank again the speakers and all the preparation that's gone into this.